Hi, welcome to episode 19 of the Ukulele Sessions. If you go to a ukulele festival, there's one player that you are bound to see, and there's a good reason for that. He's one of the best players and teachers out there, Phil Doleman. Phil mainly plays blues style on the ukulele, but he covers a lot of different styles at the same time. He's an absolutely amazing player and an absolutely amazing teacher. Often they do these surveys at the end of years in magazines, who's your favourite player, and Phil is regularly up there. Now Phil's done quite a few books and CDs. This is one of my favourite of his, Phil Doleman, Skin and Bones, and you can get this from his website, okay? And there's other ones as well. He's also done numerous books. This one here is really, really excellent. How Music Works on the Ukulele. Now it covers music theory, but not in a boring way. We all know that music theory can be quite difficult to get through. But this is such a systematic book. It's very chronological, starts right at the beginning, as if you know absolutely nothing, but doesn't treat you like an idiot. The thing I love about it is that not only does it teach you theory, but in an interesting way, but it applies it specifically to the ukulele. So by the time you've read this, you'll have a really good understanding of theory on the ukulele, which is so important because I know something that's very, very precious to Phil is that players can pick up an instrument and join in and jam. That's a skill in itself, understanding what's going on. And when you sort of first start the ukulele or any instrument, that's quite a scary thing. But with this book, it helps you to really understand what's going on and why you can play something, and importantly, why you can't play something else. While I'm chatting to Phil, he actually says, about learning pieces, rather than go out and learn a million pieces, if you do a bit of theory work, then often you know what's going to happen next in a piece, which I think is a really, really great attitude. Now, recently, Phil did a book called Rags, Cakewalks and Dances, which is original pieces, original ragtime pieces, and Phil's been putting them up on YouTube and his Patreon page. Now, if you're looking for a teacher, especially blues, Phil is your man. Do check out his Patreon page. It's very, very good. And the thing about Phil's Patreon page is he puts a lot on it. Some people out there are putting something up once a month or whatever. Phil is putting a lot of real quality stuff on there. And I know that because he spends a lot of time doing it and I've seen it. Now, the other thing that I love about Phil's playing is he's very adept at many different styles. Sometimes you'll see him playing with the finger picks. Sometimes, James Hill style, just the thumb. Sometimes Kimo Hussey style, he'll use his thumb and his finger. Other times, he'll use all his fingers. And he sort of covers all the bases on that. As far as his playing style goes, not only does he play blues, but he did a book, a selection of the works of Thomas Campion. And that's very, very early music from the 16th century. So again, he's covering all of the bases. The other thing about Phil is he's a great singer-songwriter. He's done a CD of all his own songs, which is great as well. Fantastic. Well, I really hope that you enjoy this. Do check out Phil's Patreon page. One other thing, in case you didn't know, Phil had a #2 hit in the pop charts. What can you say? I'm not going to tell you anymore. He talks about it in the interview. Let me introduce to you Phil Doleman. Hi, Phil. Great to see you.
Hello, Paul. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
You're most welcome. Most welcome. I'm really looking forward to this chat. I wonder if we could start just by you telling us a little bit about your childhood and what kind of music you were into as a young kid.
Oh, I feel like I'm on the couch now. Tell me about your childhood.
Yeah.
I've got a photograph of me playing the ukulele aged 3.
Wow.
But I don't remember anything about that. But it's a nice little reference to have. And I picked up the guitar when I was about 11. My mum plays. She's a great player, and she was learning at night school at the time, and so she taught me stuff. But I didn't really get into music till I was about 15, and I started off as a bass player. Right. And I did things, the school band, stuff like that. And then I quickly got onto guitar, having remembered those few chords. And joined the band the day I left school, and I've been doing it ever since in one form or another. I didn't play the kind of music I'm playing now, but I always loved that kind of music. I don't know, maybe I didn't feel ready to play that. I don't know if I felt like I'd found my voice yet. It took me a long time to do that, but yeah, it really was just that slow slide into my studies dipped. My interest in playing in bands went up, and then I left school and just that was it. Off I went, and I was playing in pubs and village halls and things like that.
Brilliant. I think that's a graph that you could plot for many a musician, where their musical interest goes up and their studies go down.
Oh yeah.
So you had no lessons, self-taught?
I had briefly had lessons when I started bass from a great guy called Bill, who used to play all around the pubs our way. He'd play guitar to backing tracks and things. And he taught me some bass and then a little bit of guitar and a tiny bit of keyboards. But what he really did get me doing was looking at music. I'm by no means a great music reader, but thanks to him, I can read.
Great.
Which is great for when I'm preparing lessons and things like that, because I can easily look at a piece of music and arrange it into tablature form and tweak it to fit the uke and things like that. So that was really good grounding for me.
Okay, perfect. And you came across the uke. This is quite interesting. You wanted to serenade your daughter, I believe. So you came across the uke. Is this true?
Yeah, I'm in Derbyshire now, and I was born around here, but I went down when my wife got a job in London. We went to London for a year and ended up there for 11 years. And while we were down there, our first daughter was born. So she, as we keep taunting her, she's an Essex girl. She was born near Romford. And I took her to this little group at the local library, little toddlers music group. And when we got there, it was quite disappointing to find it was just CDs.
Yeah.
That they played. And I said, wouldn't it be better with some instruments? And they said, yeah, but we haven't got anybody that can do it. So I said, I'll bring my guitar. If you can get a few simple kids safe percussion instruments, we'll do some kids songs and it'll be great fun. And I got home and realized that my guitar in its big hard case was not with a pushchair and a change bag and the tiny lift to get up to the upstairs room of the library. And so I went looking for something smaller. And I stumbled across a uke and I thought, that's perfect. It's nice and quiet and non-threatening for the kids. I can stick it under the pushchair, and that's what I did. I had no real interest in the ukulele. It was just a convenient thing. After that, and nobody played then. Nobody played. And I gradually found a few little, weirdos and oddballs online who played. There were about 8 of us, on some American forums. I found a few people who are still friends now. I made friends with them through that, and then it just grew, and I started seeing videos posted there for Cliff Edwards and Roy Smeck and people like that. I went, hang on a minute, there's something special here.
Yeah.
And that's what set me off on it, really. Yeah, that's all it was.
Fantastic. And how did you find the transition from guitar to ukulele?
I started off treating it like a little guitar. I think a lot of people do who come from the guitar. But I didn't, because I didn't know enough, and there wasn't a lot of information about, I didn't immediately stick a low G on it. It never occurred to me to do that. Whereas I know a lot of people now come from the guitar and think, I need that bottom note.
Yeah.
I didn't do that, and I just played it for what it was. And after about, 5 or 6 months, I decided I was going to start from scratch, not just convert guitar chords, because that's what I was doing. I was playing a G, but I was thinking a D from the guitar. I'm actually going to learn them properly. And I started from scratch, which is what I've always done. I did the same with banjo. I played banjo for a while, 5-string banjo, and didn't do it properly. Yeah. And then one day I went, no, I'm going to do this the correct way, and went back to square one and started to learn it for what it was. And yeah, it was that kind of little revelation that, oh, this is what the uke can do.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be a guitar. It's a uke. And I've always done that with all the instruments I play. I've never tried to make them sound like the other ones. So my tenor banjo, I want it to sound like a tenor banjo. My 5-string banjo, I want it to sound like a 5-string banjo. My uke, I want to sound like a uke, not a poor man's guitar.
Yeah, I think the banjo is interesting, isn't it? Because I found with the banjo, for me, I don't play the banjo anymore. I used to play it a lot. And I had to tackle that in a different way. Like you, when I started the uke, I think it was just, treating it like a little guitar wrongly. With banjo, I found it completely different. I wanted to talk to you about your banjo style. I have the luxury of having seen you play banjo, so I know you're a very, very good player. I get the impression that you favour the claw hammer a bit, but a lot of people that sort of do what I call the Scruggs style, when they're sort of placing their two fingers here, aren't they? And then they use picks. But you never do that on the uke, do you? You haven't transferred that style at all to the uke, have you?
No, I mean, I'm really not a Scruggs player at all. There's lots of people. I'm fortunate enough to play with some great players through teaching at Sore Fingers Bluegrass and Old Time Camp. So there's no way I would even, well, actually, a lot of the time I wouldn't even get my banjo out if it was because some of the people that were around me were so good. You know, at that camp, Percy Copley, who's a great bluegrass banjo player, as well as a uke player, who I recently made a record with him. Ron Block teaches there, who's Alison Krause's banjo player and guitar player. And when you've got people like that who are bluegrass masters, you tend to just go, I'll just sit in the corner with my uke. I won't get my banjo out. But yeah, I'm very much an old-time clawhammer player. And that is a percussive movement that way. So you can't anchor your fingers at all. And I don't anchor my fingers on the uke unless, about the only time you'll see me doing it, I've got a uke here, is if I'm playing without a strap, I will sometimes rest them there because I can rest a bit because that's holding it up.
Yeah.
But when I'm playing, that tends to just be maybe it will brush against the top so I can feel where I am, but I don't anchor my fingers at all. On the Rezo uke, there's obviously a cover on the bridge.
Yeah.
So sometimes I rest the heel of my hand on that cover, but again, it's not a firm plant. It's just where my hand falls, really. So I don't tend to do that. But what I do on one doesn't really influence what I do on the other because I'm thinking completely different for each instrument.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'll definitely cover that more as we go on a little bit. I wanted to dip you back. So you had the ukulele, and like you say, there wasn't so much online then, and then you formed the Re-Entrance with Ian Emerson, and I've seen videos going back to 2007 with you belting out "Sweet Child of Mine," an awesome version. And that must have stuck out like a sore thumb at that time, because now everyone's doing it. But then that was pretty original. So I'm holding you directly responsible for the resurgence in the ukulele. Is that a charge you accept?
Yeah. We're not selling big head. Obviously, the Ukulele Orchestra of Great Britain were doing this, and a lot of people got turned onto it by the Ukulele Orchestra. But there was a time when there was the Ukulele Orchestra, and there was me and Ian.
Yeah.
And there wasn't really much else. Certainly for that first year or two, there was a handful of clubs around the country that weren't the George Formby affiliated clubs. I mean, that's been going for a long time. But say wooden ukulele clubs playing a mixture of music. Really, there were maybe one or two at that point in time. And I met Ian on an online forum. I met him on one of these message group things online, and it says underneath your little picture where you are, and it said Derby. And I sent him a message saying, I'm thinking of doing initially a group like the Ukulele Orchestra, several of us, thinking of doing this. And he got back to me and said, you're absolutely not allowed to do this without me. So there was me and Ian, and I went round his house, and because we'd both been in covers bands before, we made a list of songs that we knew how to play or that might work. And we made, between us, we had 20 songs each, and 13 of the songs were the same on both of our lists. I went, right, there's something happening here. So we started fiddling around, and we thought this actually might be more fun to make it really minimalist.
Yeah.
So we were thinking about, a bass player, pre-U bass, just a bass player or a double bass player, lots of ukes. Suddenly it was the two of us. And we realized we could do what we used to do when we were young and had hair. We could do it again, ironically, and get away with it.
Yeah.
So, and it became as much of a comedy act as a musical act, not because we tried to make it comedy, but because between us, we just had this chemistry on stage, and Ian is a very funny person. But the music, we put a lot of work into the arrangements. So if we did a song, we did it. We did all of the bits. We'd have the guitar solo, it would be in there. The keyboard hook would be in there. As much as we could do with 8 strings. And as you say, no one else was doing it. So we'd get the odd gig and people would talk about it.
Yeah.
And when they were talking about that ukulele band, they were talking about us because there wasn't anything else. And we toured it solidly for 6 years. And we ended up, for 4 years, we were the tour support for the Lancashire Hot Pots, who have gone a sort of a bit big time more recently, getting radio play and stuff. But they were taking us to theatres with, 700-800 people in them. And we'd play to all of those people and sell them CDs at the end. And we got to the point where by our final gig, we'd gone from playing, our first gig round here was in somebody's front garden, back garden. It was a little garden party thing. That was our first gig. And our final gig was back in Derby at the Assembly Rooms, the main venue in the centre of town, with huge posters in the windows in the street as you walk past, and it sort of had this rise. But at that point, gradually, everyone else had started forming ukulele clubs and forming bands, and they were playing songs that they knew, pop songs. And they might not know how to do it, so they might look online and find us doing it. And I know people got in touch and said, how are you doing this? And have you got the chords for that? And the last time we did the Ukulele Festival of Great Britain, it was at Cheltenham, we stood backstage ticking off our set list, what we now couldn't do because someone else had done it before.
Yeah.
The big one is Ace of Spades. No one had done Ace of Spades on the uke, and now everyone does it. Joe Brown's recorded it.
Yeah, pioneering. But am I correct in saying that the last gig you did at the Assembly Halls has just been pressed on CD, although I think you've sold out? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, we did a limited run of that for 100 copies of that, and we sold it out in about 2 days.
Fantastic.
It was just a recording I made. It was the last gig. It went in a folder and then just got left there. And ages later, we dug it out and went, actually, this is brilliant. And we were always better live than on CD because there was that audience interaction. And that really came out on that recording. So probably the best thing we ever put out 10 years after we split up.
Retrospective. Yeah. Great. Thank you for telling us about that. Now, I'm going to move on to your status as a pop star. You were in the band 442. They had a number 2 hit with Come On England, which was a kind of clever reworking of the fantastic Come On Eileen. And it's your banjo playing on it. And I love that banjo riff. So this is crazy, isn't it? Come on, a number 2 hit. Let's hear all about this.
It's absolutely mad. I used to do a lot of singer-songwriter stuff with my guitar. And I put stuff out on cassette back then. And there was a website called Burbs, British Underground Rock Bands. And it was just a place where unsigned acts could put their stuff up and they would produce compilations and send them out to people. And so it was a good way of finding out about bands and having a home for your, when people didn't really even have their own websites, that was where you could send people to, and it had all your info. The guy that ran that, Barry, he got in touch with me and said, I've been asked by this guy, he's got this song and he wants a band just to go and record a demo for him. And I've got the heart of the band, but it needs a fiddle player and a banjo player. And because I was always more on the folky side of things, he said, do you know any fiddle players and banjo players? Now, I'd left my job 3 weeks earlier because I left work to look after my kids. So I was at home and left 3 weeks before. And my leaving present, believe it or not, was a 5-string banjo. I never owned one before. I've just got one. Do you know a banjo player, Phil? Yes, me. I'll do it. I had no idea. And so he's told me what it was. And fortunately, that little banjo riff, I went, well, that's easy. I can play that. That's fine. And I got given a studio in a railway arch in South London to go to. I still lived in London then. And I drove down there, spent a couple of hours there with these nice guys who I've been introduced to, went in the booth, played the riff a few times, did some other little bits and bobs they wanted, got 100 quid, went home. Thought I'd never hear any more of it. It was just a nice little paid session. Brilliant. And then a few weeks later, a message comes around saying, Steve, who wrote that song, has actually managed to get a record company to release it. And we all went, oh, that's really good. Great stuff. He said, yeah, but he's going to need a band. It might as well be you guys. You know what you did.
Yeah.
So we went and signed a record deal as the band 442. And then we went into another studio and recorded it all again with the producer that they wanted to use. He was the brilliant Gavin Monaghan up in Wolverhampton way, I think he was. So we were in London, then we were in Wolverhampton recording this thing. And we recorded it and sent it off to them, and we thought, great. And then we started to get wind that it might actually be in the charts, and little things popped up. People were going, have you seen the newspapers this weekend? There's an article on all of the songs being released. There were loads that year, 2004, there were loads. And yours is the one that they've picked to be the favourite. And then TalkSport Radio, for some reason, got behind it and started talking about it on air and playing it all the time. The next thing I know, I'm being told I've got to go down to London to be on Top of the Pops. So went down to Television Centre, got my little laminate guest pass, got dressing rooms in there. They converted the donut in the middle of Television Centre into a mouth. And you can find this on YouTube, there's that Pops moment. We pre-recorded outdoors on AstroTurf with people in stands, lots of extras brought in, and footballs being kicked around. And we did Top of the Pops. And yeah, it got to number 2. Really gutted it didn't get to number 1. I can't remember what number 1 was, but it was the highest charting of all of the football songs. And we then had to do the similar thing for CD UK that used to be on Saturday mornings. We did that. And again, horrible stuff though. That's when it made me realise that we were lucky because we were playing at it. We were pop stars for 4 weeks and it was great fun. Other people there, you get to Riverside Studios at 5:30 a.m. to run through everything and get all your cues ready. And then you go away, and we were the play out band as the credits ran at 11:30. So we sat around from 6 in the morning till 11:30. We had a 3-legged race with Blue at the back of the studios along the Thames. We're just bored. What else are we going to do? And we had to suddenly be in a Wolverhampton record shop to sign records, and then had to be in a Milton Keynes record shop to sign records with barely the time to get from one to the other. And I realised that, no, this is not a life. And we didn't get rich. In fact, we made practically nothing because most of it got spent by the record company on meals for the crew and things like that. So yeah, didn't make much at all compared to that original session fee. But fantastic. It's a nice story.
I feel like if I listened to it the other day, well, I watched it on YouTube, but I couldn't help listening. I only found myself listening to the banjo riff, that bit, and I was like,
that's the best bit.
Yeah, definitely. Funny enough, I remember reading an interview with Mick Jagger, and he was saying, someone said, what's it like being in the Rolling Stones? And he said, well, it's 10% being in the Rolling Stones, it's 90% hanging around and being told where to go.
Yeah, there was a lot of that.
Yeah. Fantastic story. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to go back to your playing style a little bit, because one of the things that impresses me about your playing style the most is you're very diverse. A lot of players, and I'm not criticising here, a lot of players have one specific style that they do. I've seen you play with thumb picks when you're sort of doing the blues stuff like Police Dog Blues. I've seen you adopt more of a James Hill style where you're sort of, mainly using your thumb. I've seen you do a great version of Stomping at the Savoy doing that. And then I've also seen you sort of using all fingers, doing sort of stuff like Ain't Misbehaving. So often in the same style, but you're same sort of genre, but you're using different styles with your fingers. Can you just tell us about your playing style a little bit, Phil?
Yeah, I do. I switch around depending on the sound I want. So if I'm playing a jazz tune chord melody, a lot of the time it will happen mainly with my thumb.
Right.
And that's from not just me playing and thinking that's the nice sound for it, but watching people like the great Lyle Ritz, who did everything with his thumb. And I thought, well, if it works for him, I'll try and play it like that, because I'm still trying to learn, and all of these things were sort of colliding. And the fingerstyle stuff, because I played guitar before, that was a fairly natural thing to go to. But I also used to do a lot, I still occasionally do, the sort of Chet Atkins style alternating thumb on the guitar. And my thumb does that on its own. So I put a thumb, a couple of finger picks, and I can come up with a pattern where my thumb is sort of going bum ching between the G and C strings, and the fingers are filling in between without really engaging my brain, because I did it on guitar for so long. Never occurred to me to do this until I saw, first of all, I saw Bob Brosman. And I learned a lot of guitar stuff from Bob Brosman VHS lessons, when you could go to the shop and buy a tape.
Yeah.
And then when I got a uke, I got a Bob Brosman uke one. And at the same time, I bought one by Del Rey, blue uke. And I know both of them had got picks on the uke, and they were playing resonator ukes. So it's no coincidence that I spend a lot of my time playing resonator ukes with picks. And the wonderful thing about the ukulele world is, which would never happen in any other world, is I then got to do a gig with Bob Brosman and several gigs with Del Rey.
Wow.
This is crazy. I'm sitting in the car park jamming with both of these people at a festival. And all of that style really came from their style, but they both got it from playing guitar, because they were both very accomplished fingerstyle guitar players before they picked up a uke. And it depends very much what I'm doing, because I'm in a bit of a weird situation, and at the moment, a great situation, a solo performer.
Yeah.
So it's lockdown. Who cares? I don't have to try and find my band members. I can do it on my own. So what I'm really concerned about most of the time, I'm singing. So I have a few instrumentals in the set. Most of the time I'm singing. So what I'm trying to do is make a band for my voice.
Yeah.
And however that happens, I've got to fill out that space. That's one of the reasons I play more clawhammer on banjo than Scruggs style, because Scruggs style really needs a rhythm section behind it, because you're dancing around the beat, so you've got to have someone keeping the beat. Whereas clawhammer, you are the beat. You're the rhythm section, and then you can sing over the top of that. The picks are an unusual thing. Not many people use them, but I firmly believe that if you play a resonator instrument, you've got to get some energy into that cone to make that cone move. And without picks, a lot of people I've heard people pick up my resonators and go, oh, it's not that loud.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, that's because you're not putting enough energy in to get the sound out. And there's a magic spot where it suddenly comes to life when the cone starts working. And the picks let me do that. Plus, of course, I've got no fingernails because I bite my nails. But yeah, I think it's a very versatile instrument, and you can get a lot of nice different tones out of it with picks, with fingers, with nails, with the side of your thumb. And I think it's one of those instruments, a bit like the guitar, where you put it in someone's hands and everyone will sound different.
Yeah.
They'll not only have a different tone, but they'll have a different approach, and yet it still sounds exactly like a uke.
Yeah.
Really flexible.
Do you tend to use plastic on your thumb and metal on your fingers and then bend them in a bit? Because the metal ones, I found you can bend them nicely to get a good, angle of attack.
Well, I use plastic ones. Del Rey uses metal ones. Bob Brosman always used to use plastic ones. And I saw Bob before I saw Del, so I bought the plastic ones.
Yeah.
Everyone wears these the wrong way, by the way. I had to do a video about this because people have seen using the pick. And they put them on that way.
Yeah, they think
which is no use to anyone, because then it hooks the string. And if you're unlucky, you can fire one of those into the front row with considerable force. Have done it. There are some picks designed to go over that side, like Alaska picks and things. But again, people say, well, why don't you use those? Well, when I started, they didn't exist, and I've got used to these now. So that curve lets you go through the string.
Yeah. Rather
than getting hold of the string and plucking it, it's more of an arc through the string, which means speed-wise, you can just go like that and put it on the strings. You're not sort of getting hold of it, pulling it, letting go. It's much more like a classical player would use nails.
Yeah.
You'd sort of have an arc through the strings. And I adjust these. These can be adjusted. What you do is you stick coins in the gap there.
Yeah.
To pull it apart. Same on the thumb one. You put a bit of cotton round in it, and you have a cup of hot water and a cup of cold water, and you dip it in the hot water, you dip it in the cold water, and then the coins will fall out and it'll be the right size. But yeah, they're a really weird thing. A lot of people say, "Oh, I should get some of those," and I go, "Probably not."
Yeah.
It took me 6 months of not playing without them for it to feel like I actually was at home with them.
Because I
And
find
I used one of them on guitar for years.
yeah, sorry to interrupt, Phil. I find it incredible that you can swap between two. Because the only time I ever wear picks is if I'm playing banjo, and obviously then you're further away from the strings almost. So then if I go back to a uke, I find I'm missing the strings almost. So for you to swap between the two in one set, I find that impressive.
It's odd, yeah. If I think about it, it's really stupid. I don't know why. It's a
well,
really crazy thing to do.
I hope I haven't made you think about it.
I can't do it now. That's all fallen to pieces. But you're right. I'm doing exactly the same thing, a quarter of an inch away from the strings.
Yeah.
But when I pick with my fingers, I don't actually tend to do a lot of actual picking. It's much more strumming, like a small controlled strum.
Yeah.
If you look at someone like, Kimo Hussey.
Yeah, I was going to say Kimo. He's very much that, isn't he?
He's strum, and I will play like that on sort of chord melody pieces where I can't do it all with my thumb because I need to keep the rhythm going with my thumb. It won't be a thumb and a pick; it'll be a brush, and I tend to brush a lot more than pick. And when I'm going to pick, I tend to put the plastic picks on. I have to swap though because they're tight. If I did a whole 3-hour set with the picks on, I'd have no feeling left in my fingertips. So I switch, do a few songs with them on, a few songs with them off to give my fingers a rest.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. It's so funny that you mentioned Lyle Ritz. I'm not sure what number I'm on now, 19 or something like that of these ukulele sessions. He's come up in every single one.
Not surprising.
Yeah, rightly so. And that moves us neatly on to a book that you've put out recently. I want to talk about the majority of your books, but we'll go in reverse order. You recently done Rags, Cakewalks and Dances, which is a great title. This is ragtime music. I love ragtime music on the ukulele because I think it just suits it perfectly. Sort of the whole diminished chord thing just sounds so great. And I wanted to sort of talk about how you wrote the pieces because this is 10 original pieces. And I read in an interview with Lyle Ritz that the way he wrote stuff was he used to noodle. I love that phrase. He used to noodle. So I was wondering, are you a noodler or do you have something specific in mind when you write, or do you start with a melody? Can you just take us through your sort of writing process a bit, please, Phil?
Yeah, I definitely noodle. And I don't think enough musicians noodle. I think it's one of those things. It's such a great tool. So if you're playing and you've got the TV on, when a commercial comes on, play the jingle. It might be 4 notes, but the ear training that goes on. So you hear this little diddly jingle and you go, I wonder if I can play that. And little things, the TV theme comes on and you sort of think, can I find the melody for that? A lot of uke players don't play melody.
Yeah.
But, that's often the thing. That's the main part of a piece. And if you can find your way around like that. So I noodle a lot. Normally when I'm writing songs, I'm trying to find something that will sit in my set. So ideally, I'm writing a song that's disguised as an old song.
Yeah.
So I know the kind of chord progressions I'm likely to want to use. Otherwise, it won't sound like it fits. But for this one, it was a different set of constraints, really, because apart from the idea that they're all supposed to sound like rags, they've got a varying difficulty. And I want to have them in different keys, and I want to have some that are in this style. So some of them are waltz time, some of them are 4/4 time, some of them are much more involved and fast, and other ones are quite slower and lyrical. And I was desperately trying to make it so that they're in some kind of progression. So the first piece is quite simple, and it sets you up for the second piece, and the second piece sets you up for the first. So by the time you get to the 10th piece, it's tough, but you should have learned enough in the other pieces to get to that one. Quite a tricky thing to do. And when you're finding ragtime stuff, you find yourself playing the same chord progression a lot because there are lots of cliches. And suddenly you think, I can't use that chord progression again. Whereas I wouldn't be bothered about that if it was a song I was going to play in the set. I'd happily have 5 songs with exactly the same chords, because if you look back at the music I play from the, early part of the 20th century, a lot of them did have the same chords. Most blues have the same 3 chords.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to put that in a book because there wouldn't be any progression. So yeah, there was a lot of noodling. And also, if I get an idea and I find a little pattern, it might be the first chord and a little run, I'll often then stop and try and sing the next bit.
Okay.
Because otherwise I'm going to go to the same old positions on the neck. So if I find the first 2 chords and I might have a little melody that goes between them, it might play the first 3 or 4 notes, and then I'll go, where could it go from there? And I go, oh, I would never have thought of playing that.
That's interesting.
It's not a familiar shape. It's gone right up the neck. And that way I like to think then I'm thinking musically rather than shapes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I never thought of that, because often, you'll be playing a chord and you're so used to the chord that generally comes next in that key that you're almost forced to do it. Whereas you're thinking, more musically there, aren't you? I like that. That's an interesting thing. And when it comes to the sort of, so with rags, you've got chords, you've got lead going on at the same time. Would you generally do a chord progression, then add a bit of lead, or maybe the other way around?
Some of them started off as just a chord progression. So the first piece is very simple. It's just a standard kind of circular fifths 5'2" pattern with a finger pattern around it. So a fingerstyle pattern through it, and the occasional little run. So I'm just trying to get people into this idea of the rhythm, the pattern, some typical chords, and we're going to break that pattern now and again to do this little run, but nothing too complicated.
Yeah.
And then, then you move on to the next one. And by the time you're at the last 3 or 4 in the book, the chords, other than them being written above the tablature for someone else to play with you, you probably wouldn't realize you were playing those chords because they're all spread out and broken up, and there are passing chords and things like that. But it goes from being chords with some twiddly bits to a full-blown melody with a bit of harmony.
Right.
They're all along this kind of line from one to the other. But a lot of them do start as a progression. So I might think to myself, I need a bridge for this tune, or it's too short.
Yeah.
And that might end up being one of the standard bridges from jazz, like the sort of honeysuckle rose bridge or something like that, or the I Got Rhythm bridge. Maybe change one chord in it, or add a melody note that's a little bit out of the key, a little bit atonal. You can do that in ragtime stuff really well. They often have a really standout weird note.
Yeah.
That you hit that and you go, oh, I wasn't expecting it to go there, but then it resolves nicely and it's this nice little bit of spice.
Yeah.
And that's what I enjoy about it. But most of the time I'm thinking either right hand of a piano, so all these little rolls that ragtime players will put around a basic chord pattern.
Yeah.
Or I'm thinking the ragtime guitar players that I grew up listening to and learnt to play on the guitar, people like the Reverend Gary Davis and Blind Blake and people like that. And the guitar rag is a very different thing to the piano rag.
Yeah, yeah.
Piano rags are almost classical music. Those Scott Joplin ones are up there with some of the best classical compositions, whereas the guitar rags can be a bit rough and ready.
Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. This book is available on your website, and it's a printed book, isn't it? You went down the actual printed book because, it's difficult at the moment with people doing PDFs and making the decision. But
I didn't for that one. That one is just an ebook. But the reason behind that is I sell it on Bandcamp, and I recorded all the pieces. So on Bandcamp, it's actually an album of me recording it, and you get the PDF with it.
Brilliant.
And I do the books that are quite thin. Yeah. Because they're just pieces of tablature. I tend to make those available as ebooks because you could print off one piece, a couple of pages, and put it on your music stand. But my other books, they're quite thick. They would be one hell of a PDF to download. You'd set it going, and then you'd go off and go to bed and wake up in the morning, and it would have downloaded. They're much heftier tomes.
Yeah. And the book that started it all off for you was How Music Works on the Ukulele. I know you've sold an awful lot of copies of this, rightly so. So can you tell us?
Yeah, that one.
Perfect. Thank you for showing us that. I've never heard anyone say a bad word about that book, Phil.
You know what, I got so lucky with that. I was doing a lot of workshops, and when I do workshops at festivals, my thing has become stealth teaching of theory. So it doesn't matter which workshop of mine you come to, I will be teaching you the same theory. So I do a jug band workshop. And what we do is we don't learn 4 jug band songs. We learn a master pattern. We take it to pieces. We figure out how it works. And at the end of it, you can play 50 jug band songs in any key. And that's so much more useful than saying to somebody, today's lesson, you're going to play this song. I've worked out the chords for you. There you go. I can't fill an hour's lesson then, because quite often they'll go, oh, okay, fine, got it. What have I taught you? Whereas what I tend to do, and this is one of the things that I do on a lot of my Patreon lessons, there might be a very simple song, but what I then do is I say, right, so this is the same progression as that song we did last time, but it's in a different key, or that one chord there is changed slightly. Why has it changed slightly? What's it done to the rest of the song? And as I was teaching this stuff, and the circle of fifths, I teach the circle of fifths in everything.
Yeah.
People said to me at workshops, they said, where can I get a book on music theory? Because I want to learn more about this, but I don't want to go and get a really heavy one designed for GCSE music. You know, we've all had the little red Rudiments and Theory of Music book.
Yeah.
Mine,
I've got it.
mine is over there.
Yeah,
it's got a coffee stain on it. You can see what I've used mine for.
Yeah.
It's just a glorified coaster.
Yeah.
And they said, I don't want to learn to read music, and I don't want to learn to play the piano. I've got no interest in doing those things. And they might also say to me, you know, and I took up the ukulele in retirement. Learning those things is going to be a very long, time-consuming process for me. What I really want to do is understand what I'm doing with this uke.
Yeah.
And so I spent that summer, 6 or 7 weeks, writing this thing, which is, 64 pages of, it starts with notes, and it arranges notes into scales. And then those scales it shows you how to make scales into chords and which chords go with which keys. And hopefully by the end of it, you've got this idea of the patterns that are in music that you don't spot when you just read from a sheet. And it's that trick. I mean, you'll know this. You go to a festival and the musicians are jamming, or they invite a guest up on stage, and they'll either say, how do you do that? Or, like I've often got, how long did you rehearse that? When did you rehearse that? And you rehearsed that.
Yeah.
I only told him he was doing it 5 minutes before he walked on, but it is just a 1-4-5 in G. And they go, what? And I go, I could show you that now in 2 minutes. And that's all it was. That's the only warning I got before we went on. It's a 1-4-5 in G. Remember me and Ian, after the re-entrance, we did a few gigs together playing this kind of stuff. And we played Grand Northern Ukulele Festival. And Aaron Kime was there with Nicole doing a set. He was headlining. And he walked past our dressing room and we were playing Trouble in Mind.
Yeah.
And he said, he stopped and stuck his head in and went, Trouble in Mind? I said, yeah. He said, what key do you do that in? I said, G. He goes, I do it in G. And of course I went, well, yeah, because I nicked it off you. And he went, do you want a double bass player? I went, yes, please. And he said, I'll see if I can find one. And he wandered off and we never saw him again until we're on stage and I look in the wings and there's Aaron going, I got a bass. All right, next song. On you come. And he played it with us. And this lovely, because I'm singing, Ian's singing harmony, and suddenly there's a different harmony from behind me from Aaron. And after that song, he sort of said, all right. And I said, where do you think you're going? We've only got one more song left. And he went, okay, what is it? And I said what it was. I said, this is the title. And then I just sort of stage whisper, it's a 12 bar in C. And he went, oh, I do that. And that's, it's teaching people these patterns. And yeah, I made 100. I had 100 printed. I put it on Facebook. And I thought, if I sell 20 or 30 of those tonight, I've covered some of my printing costs, most of my printing costs, and I can take the rest to festivals. It'd be great.
Yeah.
And I sold that first 100 in half an hour.
Yeah.
And got on the phone to the printer and said, you need to send me another 100. By the time I went to bed that night, I'd sold 250.
It's incredible, isn't it?
And it's now, I think, 1,800 copies now. And
No.
the only place you can get it is from my website, or I've got to say, it's Matt at World of Ukes. World of Ukes have sold a lot of these for me, and they have them in stock, and people buy them through the shop there. But that's the only two places. It's just me getting them printed and either sending them from me or supplying Matt at the shop to sell them.
Fantastic.
And then just before lockdown, joy of joys, I wrote the companion book for it. 2 weeks before lockdown came, that one came out.
Fantastic. So this is a progression from how music works on the uke, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they both work separately, but the idea is in that one, we talk a little bit about how chords go together in keys.
Yeah.
And also patterns that step outside the key, like circle of fifth patterns and things like this. Whereas this one is, every chapter is a different chord progression. And it shows you what it's like in terms of, I do a lot of Nashville numbers stuff.
Right.
And we learn a whole bunch of sort of diatonic progressions. So we might sort of have, you know, which step of the scale is each chord. And if you know you're in C, then you've got C, D minor, E minor, F, that sort of thing. But gradually we move through things like minor key progressions, line cliches, which I love, you know, where you get a descending note when nothing else moves, just one line goes down. And things like, progressions. I'll use songs like Beatles songs and say, this Beatles song uses this progression for the verse, this progression for the chorus, this progression for the middle eight. You can now play that song without a chart. And then a huge appendix at the back where I foolishly decided to put every one of those progressions in every key, which is about half the book, but with the diagram. So it's a reference book really, but it comes from this idea that you can actually learn to play by ear really, really well.
Yeah.
Without having some kind of magical ear. I don't have perfect pitch, and the relative pitch I have has just come from playing. I sat down to remember things. I've just played lots of songs, and I didn't know this stuff. I had no idea about theory until I was in my mid-30s, and I started getting serious about jazz guitar, maybe early 30s, and I bought a couple of books and realised if I was going to do this stuff, I couldn't memorise it. There's too much stuff to memorize. It's a lot less, people don't understand this, but when they say, I can't remember all of that, I said, but the alternative to learning this little bit of theory is to memorize all the music ever.
Yeah.
That's a much harder task than learning that those 500 songs all do this, and those 500 songs all do this. And then there's another 500 songs that do a bit of that and a bit of that. To me, easier.
I love your saying you teach music theory by stealth. I think as soon as you say especially to a child, if you're teaching a child, we're going to do music theory today. You can see their eyes roll to the back of their head. So I think,
not just kids.
Yeah.
You know what? If I said went to a big music festival, a big ukulele festival, and they put in the program my work, say I had 3 workshops, and they just went, Phil teaches theory, Phil teaches more theory, Phil teaches more theory, no one would come. But I have a jug band workshop, which is great fun, and we learn these really good fun songs. But while we're doing it, we learn how 3 or 4 progressions work. Then we have Phil does a blues workshop. Well, the first thing we do in that is we look at the one chord and the 5 chord. We build it historically, adding chords and adding sophistication. But I'm teaching all about which chords belong in which keys. And I might do 3 workshops at a festival, and I'll have my circle of fifths handy for all of them.
Fantastic.
The flip chart comes out.
Now, you mentioned also writing songs, and it's interesting that you say when you're writing songs, and indeed the book, if you're writing a book, you were saying, I've got to write something in a key, I've got to write something progressive, it's chronologically getting harder. In some ways, that's interesting, isn't it? Because realistically, when you're writing a song, Paul McCartney probably doesn't sit down and write a song and think, you know what, because of the book I'm doing, I better do one in E minor. He doesn't have that constraint. Yeah. When you're writing a song, a lyrical song, it's also got to fit in with your set. So just talk me through when you're writing a song. I'm always interested. Are you a lyrics first or a music first man?
That's always the question, isn't it? I'm a lyrics first man.
Okay.
Because I can probably come up with a chord sequence that would sound authentic.
Yeah.
Now, I can just pick up my uke and play through a set of chords. I won't be the first person that's ever played those chords, but they will be bits taken from all the songs I've played before and the songs I like to listen to. And if you listen to that sort of music, that's what it is. I mean, when I was teaching at Sawfingers Old Time and Bluegrass Camp, the first lesson on the ukulele class there was 4 chords in 4 keys. And I said, you will probably not play any more of those chords, any more chords this whole week. Because a lot of that music tends to have the 1, the 4, the 5, maybe the 6 minor. And it happens in a limited number of keys because you've got banjo players who like certain keys and fiddle players, and they're not going to be playing an old time tune in E flat because nobody likes that. Yeah. It's going to be in D, G, A, C. That's about it. So the first thing we did was the ammo for that. And you find that the chord sequences, you can't keep coming up with new ones. No. You just can't. But if I have the lyrics, then somehow I'll have some sense of where the melody's going because I'll have to be a rhythm that they fit to. Yeah. So even if I haven't got the melody yet, I know what the rhythm's going to be to make that lyric make sense. And then I can try and find a rhythm for the song. And I usually try and start off with as few chords as possible. Yeah. Until I know that I have to add another chord to make a certain bit happen. I did an EP just before Christmas, and it was a weird little thing. It's 5 songs, and they're all on banjo. Either 5-string banjo, one's on 5-string, one's on a 5-string fretless, which is this lovely old 120-year-old fretless gut-strung banjo I've got. And the other 3 are on tenor banjo. So no ukuleles involved. So you can imagine all the people that know me from the uke world failed to buy that one completely. Yeah. But on a Monday morning, I was sat exactly where I am now. I noodled around with this idea for some lyrics that had popped up, picked up the tenor banjo, fiddled around with it for a bit, and I went, I'm going to record that so I don't forget it. I recorded it, and I thought, actually, that sounds quite good. That's a good take. I might keep that, thinking I might add other instruments or whatever. Yeah. Then I went on and I taught lessons and did other things. Tuesday morning, I came down, had my coffee, started noodling around. By lunchtime, I've done it again. And then I thought, okay, don't push your luck, but let's see what happens on Wednesday. And by Friday, I got 5 songs, all recorded. And I thought, I'm going to leave them as just a vocal and a banjo. I'm not going to do anything more to them. And on Saturday, I released it. So I started on Monday morning, put it out on Saturday. Every single one of them started with the words. And I don't know if I could write words to a tune I've already written. I find that quite hard. Because obviously I've written tunes like the ragtime, but I could take those ragtime tunes and try and find words to them. But I find that really, really difficult. Whereas the other way round, it's much simpler process, I think. So yeah, lyrics first for me. And also this idea that I write more now and I'm happier with what I write now because I've got this little frame of reference that I've got to write inside. So I'm not going to write a prog rock tune. Yeah. Because it's not going to fit in my set and I've got no use for it. So I discovered that I really like limitations. And that might be something with the uke and the banjo as well, in that there are limitations on the uke. It's got a very limited range of, with a high G, you're just over an octave. Yeah. So you have to work with what you've got. And the same with the 5-string banjo. It does one thing. It does being a banjo very well. Yeah. But it doesn't do being a piano very well at all. So you can argue with it and fight with it, or you can go, let's see what comes out of a banjo.
I think it's also what you say about recording something there and then releasing that. I'm totally addicted to listening to bands' demo recordings. If I have an album that I absolutely love, I will go back and years later they release these like the demos, and half the time the demo impresses me more. So, and we've all done it in bands where you've recorded something, you've gone into a studio and you say, I want it to sound like the demo. Which is strange, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, here you go then. There's your demo. Yeah,
exactly.
And also, if you think about the way the records that I like to listen to were made, they were all made in one take, into one microphone, cut straight into the earliest ones, cut straight into wax,
Yeah.
And that was it. You did your take, and then off you went. I mean, I did that. I went and recorded on a wax cylinder a few years ago.
Wow.
I found a guy, and I put the track out. It ended up on one of my CDs. And that was wonderful because we sat there for ages making sure the wax was the right temperature and that everything was working. And then he said, shall we go for a take? And I said, yeah, other than what we've just been practicing, have you got any advice? Because we'd worked on, you've got to be really loud because you've got to make that needle move. You can't be subtle at all. Any advice? And he said, yeah, don't muck it up. Because if you muck it up, I've got to get this piece of wax and I've got to shave it down again. And I've got to get to the right temperature again. I've got to put it on again. You get one go. And lots of the old recordings I listened to were anything but perfect.
Yeah.
But what they did do was they captured that moment in time. They're a bit more like a photograph rather than a painting that someone spent years on. They're just a quick snapshot. And more, I'm recording like that.
Yeah, it's
where
an exciting way to do it, isn't it? And I think that funny. I mean, it's very, very sad this week that Julian Bream died, and he was saying that at one stage his sight reading was better than playing something that he's played for many years because of the excitement that he got from playing a new piece. And that's how he ended up doing so many records. He was such a good sight reader. They'd put him in to play something. He'd never played it before. So the excitement was there. He wanted to play it. And it's that thing, isn't it?
Edge of your seat. That's it. It's like, I love jamming with people because, I mean, on stage in front of people. I love it when people say, some people hate that. They go, oh, I can't come on stage. I want to know what I'm doing. And I completely get that. Years ago, that would have terrified me. But I love it now, just getting up on stage and going, do we all roughly know where we're starting and finishing? Let's see what happens. Because it keeps you in the moment. You have to listen to everybody else. You can't just go, well, here's my solo, so I'm going to do it. Because the banjo player has forgotten that it's your solo and has started their solo. You have to be able to go, oh, that's okay. We'll listen to him. When he's done, we'll make sure we make eye contact, and then who's going to, oh, it'll be me next. And you're sort of finding your way, listening and seeing what's going on. Whereas when you rehearse something, the re-entrance set was so tightly rehearsed that we would often just be thinking about what we're going to have for dinner.
Yeah.
Because it was just happening. And it was, by definition, it had to be the same every night.
Yeah.
And we could do that on autopilot. We could come off stage and not remember what songs we'd played that night.
Yeah.
Because we weren't really thinking about it. And it's lovely to be in a situation where there's a bit of freedom, a bit of improvisation, a bit of looseness. I don't like to play the same thing the same way twice, ever.
Yeah, well, Earl Scruggs said that, didn't he? He said, I don't think I've ever played, Foggy Mountain Breakdown the same twice, which makes it hard to learn. But
just think of all those people that have learnt religiously one version of that, as if it's the definitive one.
Yeah.
And it isn't. It's just what he did that day.
Right, he did that.
I mean, Percy and I just did a CD of Jimmy Rogers songs.
Yeah.
But Percy, I don't know if people know Percy, but he's a great ukulele player, but a great mandolin player and banjo player and guitar player. He's English, but he lives in France. And he comes up and together at festivals, and we talk together at Sawfingers and things. And so we thought, well, let's do this while we've got nothing else to do at the start of lockdown. And so we did it all by email, just sending files to each other. And Jimmy Rogers, the standing joke about him is he never played anything the same way once.
Yeah.
He would put in an extra bar or half bar or whatever, because it was all about the vocal delivery and storytelling. So if he needed an extra couple of beats to get that line out clearly, that's what he'd do. It wasn't all squared off. Yeah. And we actually even tried to do that. And that's really difficult when you're not in the same room and you try. There were lots of scribbled charts emailed back and forth going, there's an extra half bar there, don't forget that. And a lot of cursing. But that looseness is something.
With Percy, isn't there?
Of course, yeah.
Fantastic. Now, I have one final question for you, but just before we go on to that, do you have room for teaching at the moment? Because I know you're incredibly busy, but there's really, when it comes to blues, ragtime and that, there is no one else as good as you. So I'm wondering, little advert, do you have room for lessons and teaching at the moment?
I do. I have a couple of weekday daytime slots for those people that are stuck at home doing nothing now. I've got, I think, 3 of those at the moment that I can squeeze in. And of course, you know, if people don't like that, they can always get the video lessons
Perfect.
off Patreon.
Yeah.
Another little plug.
Lovely. Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I think we're getting a slightly dodgy internet connection now because we've got such terrible wind here, which I don't mean me personally. I mean, yeah, in Northampton we have the terrible wind, so I think that's affecting us a bit. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out Phil's Patreon page. And the thing that we were talking about earlier, Phil's Patreon page is there's a lot of content in it. So I'll put up a link to that at the end of this. Finally, Phil, something that I wanted to ask you that I ask everyone who comes on here. You're going on a car journey, Phil. You can go anywhere in the world. You can go with anyone. What car are you going to be in? Who are you going to be with? Where are you going to go? And what are you going to put? I'm not going to say stereo. What are you going to put on the cassette player?
Cassette player. Oh, wow. This is going to sound really, really corny, and I don't care. I would be in my old Nissan Micra.
Oh, love it.
I would be with Mr. Ian Emerson sitting next to me.
Lovely.
We'd have probably some Django Reinhardt on the stereo, and we would be going somewhere up the M6, but we would be stopping at Sandbach services at 1 o'clock in the morning for a coffee to try and stay awake to get home from the gig. Because we did so much of that when we were touring heavily together. And they were great days. And we had a ball doing it. So, yeah, I'd do that.
That's absolutely fantastic. I took my test in a Micra. Nissan Micra.
It's amazing how much PA equipment you can get in a Micra.
Yeah.
It really is.
Fantastic. And you'd have a bit of Django on the stereo, which, yeah, I mean, they're incredible, his recordings, aren't they? I listen to Django a lot, and something I meant to say earlier, talking about sort of quality, because the Django ones, a lot of them, you can really hear that rustle in the background. But if you compare it to the Lyle Ritz ones, I know they were maybe, what was Lyle, 15 years later, 20 years later, something. The Ritz recordings are incredible, aren't they? The clarity on them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But yeah, some of those recordings, they're so... Even the really old ones, a lot of old blues recordings I've got, given the technology, they're remarkably good.
Yeah.
It's incredible. They made records like that with what they had. And yeah, again, there was no overdubbing, there was no correction, there was no editing. What you're hearing is the sound of that band, you know, Django, Stefan Grappelli, just playing.
Yeah. Yeah, at their best. Fantastic, Phil. That has been a wonderful interview. I think people are going to really enjoy what you've had to say. So I'm going to stop recording now, if I can find the stop button.